Hello and welcome to Geopier.news. Today we've got an interview with Mr. Steven Gruzd, Head of African Governance and Diplomacy at the South African Institute of International Affairs. He specialises in South African foreign policy with current research on the South Africa-Russia relationship. He's also based in Johannesburg. Enjoy!
So first of all, is it okay if you just introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm Steven Gruzd, and I work at the South African Institute of International Affairs in Johannesburg. I am head of our African Governance and Diplomacy program and our Russia-Africa project. Work on foreign policy, governance, a little bit on elections and human rights, and increasingly on Russia's relations with Africa and Africa's broad relations with other powers.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So first of all, I just wanted to touch on one thing. Obviously, a few weeks ago, President Ramaphosa won the election again. Obviously, he didn't win an outright majority and had to have a coalition with the DA party. I just was thinking, could you talk us through what you think will happen with that landscape? Do you think being in coalition will affect Ramaphosa's foreign policy at all?
Okay, so firstly, yes, they are in coalition with the Democratic Alliance, but they have formed what's called a government of national unity. And in fact, there are 10 different political parties in this ruling coalition. So it's a bit more complex than just a bilateral arrangement. I don't expect many changes. While the ANC, this is the first time it's had to share power, it did not give up the Foreign Ministry or the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. So the former Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Ronald Lamola, has been appointed as Foreign Minister, replacing Naledi Pandor, Dr. Naledi Pandor. And the two deputy ministers are both from the ANC as well. And a very important body that determines or influences South African foreign policy. There are two, actually. One is the Portfolio Committee in Parliament, and the other is within the ANC, their International Relations Committee. And both of those are still kind of firmly in place. So while it is compromises are needed to form any coalition government on foreign policy, from what we've seen so far, there doesn't seem to be a huge change. There will be a lot of consistency with the same principles that have guided South Africa's foreign policy for the last 30 years. So I expect to see more continuity than change. What we might see is a little bit of a change in style, maybe a change of emphasis in certain areas. But in terms of the broad trajectory of the policy, it's going to be pretty much the same.
We'll come back to Ronald Lamola in a little bit. I just wanted to touch on something you said there. The last part about how the sort of tone might shift. What do you think might happen there?
Well, certainly. I mean, the best example to give is on Israel, where Pandor was very tough on Israel, was very pro-Palestinian. Some even say supporting Hamas, involved with Iran, etc. Her relations with the Jewish community in South Africa were very bad. She never, she really hammered the issue hard. What we've seen from Lamola, it's still an issue. It's still important to South Africa. There's no question of South Africa dropping the case at the International Court of Justice, for example. But in these early days, and I must stress it's early days, there doesn't seem to be the same intensity on that particular question. There's also some difficult relations with the United States, particularly on South Africa's stance on the Ukraine war, but also on its opposition to Israel in the court. That has strained relations with the US, and so I think there may be some attempts at conciliation. In fact, a delegation will be going to Washington in a few weeks' time, headed by the new Minister of Trade investment and competition, Parks Tau, who's quite a heavyweight within the ANC. So, yeah, I think everybody has a different style. I think perhaps Lamola might be a bit more measured than Pandor was, especially on that issue. But again, he was really front and center on the ICJ case. He appeared along with Pandor in The Hague at the various hearings. And so he's very au fait with the issue, and I think also feels very strongly about it. And the ANC also feels very strongly about it. So I guess there might be some hoping from some quarters that the tone will be more measured and that we will not jeopardize relations with the US and the West more generally, given the investment that they make in the country, their importance on the international stage, and the jobs that are dependent on those relations.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, Lamola came in to this new role, but I was watching a little bit of a speech that he did recently, and he said he wants to move the foreign policy to more address the needs for our people. Do you think that means, obviously you're just saying how jobs come from the West and investment and money and stuff. Do you think that is him sort of signaling the position?
It might be. It might be. But this is something the ANC has been saying for many, many years. That they want foreign policy to be beneficial for national citizens. So a lot of that is about investment, and that's certainly something Ramaphosa has tried to do and done successfully, actually, in his years as president. So I guess there may be more emphasis on bringing in deals and bringing in funding to the country by way of investment. But it's quite difficult to give benefits to the ordinary citizen from something as lofty as foreign policy. So there may be more of an attempt to ground it in what people say on the ground, but I think it's going to be quite a difficult task to accomplish what he's setting out to do.
I wanted to speak about the ANC's position on Russia as well, and all the coalition parties coming into effect. That we spoke about last week. South Africa's potential moving to being like a global deal maker between sort of the two sides that are starting to develop in the world. Do you think that's a path that is clear that they're going down?
I don't think it's clear, but I think in the two big international conflicts that are raging at the moment, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and Hamas, South Africa has certainly inserted itself into the equation. So last year in June, South Africa led a delegation of African Union presidents to both Ukraine and Russia to talk about practical issues like exchange of prisoners and return of children. So I think it sees for itself a potential mediatory role. It also says it wants to play the same role in the Middle East. But my view is that it has come down so heavily on one side and so supportive of the Palestinians that any vestiges it may have or any credibility that it may have with Israel has long since departed. I mean, South Africa hasn't had an ambassador in Israel for 5 years. The Israeli ambassador left South Africa because of pressure. Diplomatic relations are very strained, and so forth. So I think that while South Africa may have a desire to play a role in that particular conflict, I just don't think it would be acceptable to Israel. But South Africa does have good relations with Iran. It does have good relations with Qatar. So it is possible that it could be part of a bigger group. And South Africa has always espoused peace and discussion and dialogue and negotiations. So in that sense, it does see itself as a bit of a mediator. But I don't know if we can characterize that this is definitely what it's going to do. Is it definitely going to be a attempt to be a bridge builder? Because That was very much the rhetoric in the Mandela era. After that, Mbeki was very much an Africanist, Pan-Africanist, and Zuma was kind of doing his own thing, focused on a lot on BRICS. And now Ramaphosa is trying to recapture that Mandela sort of aura and era and style, but not, I don't know, too successfully. So long story short, I think South Africa will probably be cooperative and want to play a role. Whether it actually has the leverage and the capacity and the power to do so is an entirely different question.
Yeah, fair. Obviously, you talked a little bit about the how they might not be able to manage that in the Middle East, with potentially being seen to be on one side already. Could it potentially be the same in Russia, Ukraine as well? And one thing I was going to say is, do you think Russia might have or try and push an influence so they wouldn't even be or would be less on Ukraine's side that they already are?
I think Russia, well, the Ukraine-Russia conflict is quite different. It's one sovereign state invading another one in violation of the UN Charter. I think Russia's probably pretty satisfied with South Africa's position. There's a lot of talk that Russian money came into South Africa for the election, but we do know from legislation that mandates parties to reveal donations over a certain amount that the Russian businessman Viktor Vekselberg was one of the biggest single donors to the ANC. There's also talk that Zuma's party probably got money from the Russians. But I don't think I think Russia is probably quite satisfied with South Africa's role and stance. So there may have been some pressure previously, but it's almost like this one's in the bag and they don't need to expand, they don't really need to push South Africa much further. But as I say, in the last year, we have seen a rebalancing of this, as South Africa has tried to speak to both sides and deal with practical issues like prisoners and children on this. They did go to Zelensky's peace conference in Switzerland, but they didn't sign on to the communique in the end. So they're still ambivalent. At the UN, they have abstained on any resolutions on Ukraine as well, which I'm sure suits Russia just fine.
Yeah, definitely. I think good point. They could already be satisfied with, don't need any sort of further more. One thing I wanted to ask you on as well is your expertise in South Africa and Russian foreign policy and relations. Is there anything that you've seen recently that many people wouldn't have heard about or known of that's sort of interest?
Not really. We've seen, one thing which was quite interesting was when Russia held the referendums in the occupied areas of Ukraine, so Donetsk and Lugansk and Zaporizhia, and I forgot the fourth one. That will come to me. I think Kherson. Last year, the ANC Youth League, much to everybody's surprise, popped up to observe those elections and said that they were a wonderful process. And the rest of the world has said, really, this was a sham. Some say that the Youth League did this off their own bat and hadn't really consulted with the ANC, but they were giving fulsome praise. So I think that's one interesting thing, and you can probably still find the videos on YouTube. They're quite amusing.
Yeah.
Of these observations of this election.
Goodness me! Why did they do that? If just out of showing a little bit of support,
showing support to Russia.
Yeah.
Saying the parties that are kind of to the left of the ANC being both Mkhonto Wesizwe, which is Zuma's party, and the Economic Freedom Fighters under Julius Malema, are both arguably even more pro-Russian and anti-Western than the ANC itself is. So there's some push from that side. As I said, I think Russia. The other thing that's quite interesting is that soon after the war began, the feed for the Russian television channel RT, previously known as Russia Today, was coming from Europe and being broadcast through our MultiChoice, which is a satellite TV company, and it was being broadcast throughout Africa. And I think in March, Europe, because of the sanctions, cut that feed. And so South Africa was no longer able to get the channel and broadcast it. And that created quite a lot of anger and quite a lot of people saying, well, it's free speech. And if you choose to watch it, you can watch it. But now we don't even have the choice. Russia RT tried to set up a fully fledged bureau in South Africa, which was not successful. And they're not back on the air, so it's interesting.
It's a bit worrying. That.
What else? Yeah. No, I mean, otherwise the relations with Russia have been warm and existed for many years. As far back as the days of the Soviet Union, when young students went to study in Russia or in the USSR and in other Eastern Bloc countries, there's a nostalgia, there's a long-term investment that was made because some of those students are now in positions of power.
Yeah. The other thing as well, obviously we've spoken about South Africa and sort of on the world stage with things going on, but within Africa itself, obviously, South Africa is seen as the sort of one of the leaders, especially in Southern Africa. I presume with what we've discussed, obviously Ramaphosa staying in and the coalition with all the parties exerting some influence, but potentially not changing decisions that much. Is there anything that we can see from South Africa within Africa that could be interesting going forward?
Well, you're right. South Africa is considered one of the leaders of the continent, along with countries like Egypt and Algeria and Nigeria. Nigeria has had particularly weak leadership for many years, and that's been difficult. South Africa still considered itself a leader. Our businesses do a lot of trade in the African markets. Ramaphosa happened to be chair of the African Union in 2020, and the theme for that year was silencing the guns, trying to stop all the wars in Africa, which was spectacularly unsuccessful. But he also presided over the first year of COVID, and by all accounts was very positive for that. He managed to convene leadership. They set up structures, and I think COVID was mitigated and less bad than it might have been in the absence of his leadership. So he had a tough year at the helm of the African Union, but I think that it's worked out. It's worked out quite. He came out of that with quite a lot of credit and respect. As we've said, I don't think that the coalition will moderate policies too much, and there certainly wouldn't be anybody in the coalition that would be against South Africa's leadership role in Africa. One interesting area is that South Africa has troops in two peacekeeping missions in Africa, one in northern Mozambique and one in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the Defense Force, National Defense Force, is severely underfunded, has a very old army, has a lot of equipment that it can't supply. So even though both of those deployments are part of SADC, the Southern African Development Community, so a regional response, South Africa just doesn't have the firepower to really change much in those conflicts. And as more and more soldiers are dying here and there, people are asking questions. And certainly, I think the Democratic Alliance would push a bit to say, what's happening here, and is this really in our national interest?
Yeah, it's something we're seeing all over, isn't it? With militaries not really being invested in for the last X amount of time, and now all of a sudden there's a race where we potentially need stuff. So it's interesting, but especially more so when South Africa is in a location in the world where I guess it's more dangerous. I mean, I say that, but in the UK we're not far from Ukraine, are we? So it's thank you very much. I wanted to change the tone a little bit. I am an England fan for rugby, so I was actually supporting you guys at the weekend, but unfortunately, I know.
It was heartbreaking. I mean, yeah, if we'd let that ball bounce that gave them the line out, it would have been our put in. So yeah, you can look at the tiny things. I mean, good for Ireland for really getting the drop goals, but yes, very disappointing.
I know it was a close game though, wasn't it? I was watching and I watched the week before as well, to be fair, and you guys were a lot better. But yeah, Ireland
we seem to be missing something. I think it was extremely physical, which South Africa is so used to dominating. I think those Irish lads are big guys. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I know. I saw one of the the stats that come up on the scrums and stuff. I think for the first one, Ireland's pack weighed more than South Africa. I don't think I've ever seen something like that before.
No, absolutely.
But no, it was a cracking game. How are you can't be too disappointed though. 2 World Cups still.
No. Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah. We play Portugal this week, which should be a different kind of a challenge. But
definitely.
Okay. Well, good luck for the research.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you very much for giving me so much of your time, Matt. Really appreciate it.
No problem, Ralph. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, sir. See you soon.
Okay.
Thanks for watching Geopier.news. Comment on the video and make sure you read the accompanying article on South Africa where we speak to even more experts. Thanks again.